Welcome back, fiber friends, to yet another episode of the Wool to Gold podcast. Today's podcast topic is going to be comb top versus roving. What's the difference? Why does it matter? Why do people prefer one over the other? If you're a brand new spinner, there is a ton of terminology to navigate when it comes to the world of spinning. The vocab can be a really steep learning curve, if we're being honest. And one of the most common questions that I've been getting recently is, what is the actual difference between top and roving? So there is an actual difference. The terms should not be used interchangeably and randomly. And I will say, full disclosure, before we even start this video, there are unfortunately a lot of hand dyers that do kind of use these terms interchangeably, even though they shouldn't be used that way. So keep that in mind when you're purchasing your fiber, and take a look at the actual photos of the fiber that you're buying and use some of the clues that I'm going to talk about today to guide you into figuring out if it's actual roving or if it's actually comb top. So right off the bat, before we start talking about the differences between comb top and roving, both of these can come in a lot of different formats, right? Today I have two braids of comb top, but comb top can come in a big rolled up ball, like this ball of roving that I have down here, this blue ball of roving. And also this sort of longer, like drafted roving that I have on top of the blue roving can be put in a braid format. So don't assume because you are buying a braid that it is going to be comb top, and vice versa. You know, there are lots of different ways that you can kind of store these types of fiber. So just keep that in mind as we continue this video. So in the simplest terms, the difference between top and roving is the style of preparation. So top is combed. It's combed top, and I'm going to insert a photo of combs. I'm going to bring out my combs and my cards in a moment to show you an example of what these tools look like. But essentially, when you comb fibers, you are aligning the fibers so they are all right next to each other, essentially, and kind of densely right next to each other, very compactly right next to each other. We call this aligned, and you can actually see when you look at fiber that has been dyed with silk, I think especially, the grain of the fiber becomes very, very obvious. So comb top is going to have a grain to it, okay? Whatever fiber it is, it should have kind of this visible grain. And although I've talked about this in the past, some types of top are going to be more compact and more like tightly aligned than others, so they're going to require a little bit more pre-drafting. But in general, this is what we would consider a comb style of preparation. And another word that somebody might use for this is a worsted style of preparation. So worsted is not just a weight of yarn, okay? In the world of spinning, it's actually a style of yarn, I think is the word that I would probably use. So it refers to a style of prep, and it refers to a style of drafting. Today, we're just going to be talking about the prep side of things. I can do a totally separate video talking about drafting another day. But when it comes to preparation, if you want a worsted style yarn, so something that is going to be dense, drapey, a lot of the times worsted style yarns are going to be very resistant to pilling because, again, all those fibers are tightly next to each other, so it's harder for them to sort of escape and form those pills. You're going to want a combed top. Now, how is that any different from roving? So roving is different because it is a carded style of preparation. We use something like hand cards or a drum carder or a blending board in some cases to produce a misaligned fiber, okay? So the fibers are not sitting super tightly right next to each other. Instead, they are crisscrossing, and they're causing essentially like air pockets and a more like fluffy yarn style of preparation. I personally think that roving is best for beginner spinners. I do think it's the easiest to learn on. I'm not saying you can't learn on comb top. I'm just saying I think it's easier to learn on roving. So again, these fibers are not as aligned as the comb top. Even if you look closely, like obviously, okay, so the colors would lead you to believe that there's like a grain to this, but if you look up close, you see how it looks like fuzzy. There's not a distinct grain to the fiber. That is something that is going to give you an idea that it's going to be a roving versus a comb top. I really love roving. Again, it's going to produce a airier woolen style yarn. So these yarns are going to be warmer than a worsted style yarn. They are going to be like, again, squishier, airier. They are going to be more likely to pill though compared to a worsted style yarn. So worsted and woolen style preps both have their like pros and cons. Some yarns are more appropriate for some projects and some yarns are more appropriate for other projects. Some people just spin because it's fun, and personally I think roving is one of the easiest things to spin just for funsies, because the fibers just naturally kind of catch on one another, and again, you don't really need to pre-draft roving out in a lot of cases. A real quick side-by-side of just these tools, if you want to see my drum carder and my blending board in action, I'm going to link my like all about carding video down below and you can go check that out instead. But these are obviously the combs, and as you can see, right, this is how we get all those fibers nicely aligned next to each other. Obviously, this looks really different on like an industrial or commercial level, but this is what it looks like on like the like hand combed level, okay? And you can sort of understand the logistics of how this works. On the opposite end, you have these hand carders. They do look like giant dog brushes, okay? And they have these tines or little teeth here, and you know, we kind of move it back and forth, and that's how we misalign the fibers and get all that lovely air into the fiber prep, and make super squishy yarn. So that's how the carders work. The last thing I briefly wanted to talk about, and again, this is going to be kind of a short video, again, it's just an overview and a basic understanding of what the difference between these two things really are, is that there is a really common misconception that you can't get really bright colors on roving or really saturated colors on roving, and that's actually not necessarily true. So it's actually a trick of the eye because these fibers are more aligned, okay? They are reflecting light better back at you, and therefore the colors look a lot more saturated and intense. And the evidence to support this is that a lot of people experience that when they spin up a comb top like both of these, that the finished yarn is not going to be as vibrant or saturated as the original hand dye. This is not just because people are spinning the yarn in a way that muddies the colors. It's also because when you turn a comb top where the fibers are perfectly aligned into a yarn, you're twisting the fibers and ever so slightly misaligning them, even if you're drafting in a very worsted fashion as well. So really spinning a true worsted yarn. Now, in a lot of cases, people experience the opposite to be true with roving. So instead of becoming less saturated in the spinning, the finished yarns when you spin roving can oftentimes look more saturated or darker than the actual roving does. And the reason for this is, again, the opposite. So the fibers are misaligned. They're not reflecting light well back at you. But when you spin the yarn, when you add that twist, you're kind of aligning them, especially if you end up doing sort of a like a short forward draw on a roving. You're going to end up with a semi-worsted, semi-woolen style yarn because you're using a woolen prep, but you're doing a worsted style of drafting. And the colors are going to end up looking darker than they do in the initial roving, and that's because the fibers are reflecting back that color a little bit better because the fibers are aligned a little bit better once you have spun them. This is a really rough scientific explanation of this, so if somebody has like a much better explanation of it down below, drop that link, tell me all about it. This is just how it's been explained to me by other spinners and like guild members and things like that. And so I just wanted to share this knowledge. Again, neither is necessarily like better or worse. Like roving and comb top to me are both like equally good fibers. They just have different places and different uses. And you can actually turn a lot of comb top like this into like a semi-woolen style preparation, using tools like hand carders or drum carders, or one that has definitely had a nice little revival here on YouTube, the blending board. Also a really fantastic tool for like taking something like this and making it a little bit easier to spin, or making it a woolen style preparation, turning it into rollags or something like that. These are not the only two styles of preparation as well. Prep is kind of a spectrum, just like drafting is. So in between roving and comb top, there are lots of other things like rolags and bats, which bats alone can be more, some bats are more like woolen style and some bats are a little bit more like the fibers are all lined. So it really depends on how you do the preparation. Anyway, I wanted to keep this video short because I wanted to make it easy and digestible. I hope you learned something. I hope this answered your questions. If you like this video, if you want to see more of me, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you have any other questions, don't forget to drop them down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next episode of the Wool to Gold podcast.